The sun is setting over Ouagadougou. The horizon burns gold. The streets buzz with restless energy, and somewhere inside the presidential palace, a phone rings. On the other end isn't a fellow African leader. It isn't a call from Paris or Moscow. It's Washington, D.C., the message? Captain Ibrahim Traoré, you've been invited to appear live on American television. Not just any show. The Mark Levin Show. One of the loudest, most combative stages in U.S. media. Now let's be real. Everyone knew what that meant. This wasn't about dialogue. This wasn't about mutual respect. No, this was an ambush disguised as an interview. A trap set not with bullets, but with cameras, scripts, and an audience ready to laugh on command. But here's the twist. Traoré said yes. Most African leaders would have refused. Why go on a show designed to humiliate you? Why let yourself be interrupted, mocked, and turned into a meme? But Traoré isn't like most leaders. He understood something crucial. Sometimes the lion's den is exactly where you have to go. Because if you can walk in and walk out unbroken, you don't just protect your dignity, you rewrite the story. And that's what this was all about. Rewriting the story. Inside the brightly lit offices of a Manhattan television studio, the atmosphere was electric. Producers buzzed around like wasps, clutching folders, adjusting headsets, whispering strategies. On the whiteboard in the control room, scrawled in thick black marker, were the words, "The African File." It sounded official, but in reality, it was nothing more than a hit job. Stacks of paper lay across the desk. Statistics pulled from outdated reports, charts stripped of context, and headlines printed in bold red ink. Poverty percentages blown out of proportion. Corruption indices highlighted without explanation. Grainy clips from foreign news agencies replayed over and over, chopped and edited to look as damning as possible. To them, this wasn't journalism. It was theater. And Traoré wasn't being invited as a guest. He was being staged as the villain of the show. Their strategy was clear, almost mechanical, like a military operation, but aimed not at soldiers, but at perception. Step 1. Hit him with economic stats. Numbers that sounded devastating even if half of them came from outdated sources. GDP collapse, food insecurity, aid dependency, phrases designed to sting. Step 2. Throw around labels. Dictator. Strongman. Backward. Words that sting harder than any statistic because they reduce a man into a caricature. Step 3. Interrupt constantly. Don't give him space to breathe. Don't let him explain. Talk over him, drown him out, make the audience believe his silence means guilt. Step 4. Force him to lose his cool. Push until he snaps. If he raises his voice even for a second, they win. Because then he becomes the angry African leader they came to portray. Step 5. Clip it for YouTube. Cut out context. Post the meltdown. Make it go viral. Let the world laugh. That was the playbook. Cold, clinical, and dripping with arrogance. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Mark Levin himself was rehearsing like a prizefighter before a bout. He stood in front of a mirror, smirk curling across his lips, repeating lines with perfect rhythm. He practiced the timing of interruptions, the raise of his eyebrow, the condescending chuckle he'd drop after a particularly sharp jab. In his mind, the outcome was already decided. To his loyal audience, this would be another spectacle. Another night where America laughs at the world, secure in its own superiority. What they didn't realize, what not a single one of them in that building seemed to understand, was that the man they were about to face wasn't walking into that studio as a desperate politician seeking validation. No, Captain Ibrahim Traoré was coming as something much larger. He was coming as the embodiment of history itself, the unbroken weight of centuries of resilience, a presence carved not by Western approval but by the soil of his own land. Something older than their statistics, harder than their insults, and utterly unshakable. And in less than an hour, they were about to find out what that meant. The studio lights burned hot. Cameras swiveled. The crowd leaned forward in anticipation, and then he walked in. No entourage. No fanfare. Just a man in a dark suit, steady steps, calm eyes. His presence said one thing: I don't need to prove myself here. I already know who I am. The handshake was brief, firm, unflinching. A spark of tension snapped in the air. Levin leaned into the mic, smirk curling. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we welcome Captain Ibrahim Traoré, coup leader of Burkina Faso. A man who somehow thinks he can lecture the world's greatest democracy. The crowd chuckled. The trap was set, but Traoré, he didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Levin wasted no time. Tell us, Captain, why should Americans listen to a military strongman from one of the poorest nations on earth? What can you teach us? The audience laughed. It was supposed to be the knockout punch. Traoré paused. The silence stretched. People shifted in their seats. He leaned forward, his voice calm, measured, deliberate. Mr. Levin, I notice you began with insults, not questions. Perhaps we should start with truth, not theater. Boom! The laughter died instantly. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Levin's smirk flickered, and just like that, the battle had begun. For the next 70 minutes, America witnessed something unforgettable. Levin interrupted Traoré 18 times. 18. Every time. Louder, more desperate, trying to cut him off, trying to break his rhythm, but Traoré never raised his voice, never snapped back. He simply paused, waited, and continued, exactly where he had left off. It was like watching a storm crash against a mountain. Noise against silence, ego against dignity. At one point, Levin blurted, "Your people live in mud huts. You're blaming us for your failures." The audience chuckled nervously. This was the moment Traoré was supposed to explode, to shout back, to prove the stereotype, but instead, he tilted his head slightly, almost pitying, and said, "In my country we have a saying, the empty barrel makes the most noise." The room froze. The insult boomeranged back at Levin. The audience looked uneasy. For the first time, the mighty talk show host looked small. Frustration boiled over. Levin shot up from his chair, finger jabbing the air. "You're nothing but another dictator blaming the world for your problems," he shouted, voice cracking, and then came the moment that flipped history. Traoré didn't even look at Levin. He turned his eyes directly to the camera, straight into the living rooms of millions of Americans. His voice dropped low, steady, impossible to ignore. "You invited me here to humiliate me. But what you've revealed tonight is not African weakness. It is American insecurity. 18 interruptions are not a sign of strength. They are a sign of fear. Fear that Africa might finally speak for itself. Dead silence. The cameras kept rolling, but you could hear a pin drop, and then something no one expected. An elderly black woman in the audience rose to her feet. She started clapping, slowly, firmly. Within seconds, others joined. The applause spread, until the entire audience, Levin's audience, was on its feet. A standing ovation, not for Levin, for Traoré. By dawn, the internet was ablaze. Clips flooded TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. The hashtag Our Truth Does Not Bow hit #1 worldwide. Teens remixed it. College students dissected it. Even professors used it in lectures about rhetoric and power. Levin? Finished. Sponsors bailed. Networks distanced themselves. Memes exploded. 18 interruptions became shorthand for desperate men exposed by calm truth. Meanwhile, Traoré was everywhere. Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, sending invites. The UN called for a keynote. African youth movements replayed his words on megaphones. Anger is not an argument. Volume is not truth. For the first time in decades, Africa wasn't trending as a problem. It was trending as a voice. Let's be clear. This wasn't just about one man outsmarting a TV host. This was about flipping the script on centuries of disrespect. For too long, African leaders had been invited to Western platforms only to be mocked, lectured, dismissed. But that night, the tables turned. On live American television, it wasn't the African president who lost his composure. It was the American host. And that image, Levin red-faced and shouting, Traoré calm and steady, burned itself into history because it proved something simple, something undeniable. Calm truth beats loud arrogance every single time. Across the world, people drew their own lessons. In Africa, hope. Youth saw that dignity can win against disrespect, that you don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to stand firm. In America, reflection. Many saw a mirror, saw the ugliness of arrogance, saw what happens when you confuse loudness with wisdom, and in the halls of power, quiet fear. Because if one African leader could walk into their strongest media arena and walk out unbroken, what did that mean for the future? When asked later why he agreed to the interview, Traoré's answer was simple. Sometimes you must face disrespect to prove dignity cannot be destroyed. That's it. No bragging. No victory lap. Just truth. And maybe that's why his words stuck. Because he didn't just win an argument. He